Good afternoon and happy Sunday to everyone. This week is the fourth Sunday Lenten reflection. So, fourth Sunday in our journey through Lent in preparation for Easter. Today's reading, I'm going to dive right in. Today's reading at church was on the gospel reading was on the Prodigal Son story. And I think it's in Luke. They might mention it somewhere else in the Gospels as well, but I think Luke 15 is where it's at, I believe. And if you want, first of all, if you want a deep dive on the Prodigal Son story, I think we mentioned that one in our episode, because I know it's one of Brian's favorite Bible stories. So we have an episode called On Our Favorite Bible Stories, and I'm pretty sure he listed that one there. So I'm sure we went deeper into that. What we love about the Prodigal Son reading is it can be kind of hard to dissect, hard to hear. At any given time, you can relate maybe to either brother. And so every time you read it, you can get something new out of this story. And so today, when it was being read, I was listening, and it was to the part where the son that stayed home, not the one that went out and kind of squandered his inheritance and then came back, but the one that stayed home, he approached his father and said, you don't even slaughter a goat for me, and here, you've slaughtered a calf for him, basically. And the father turns to him and says, well, what I have is yours, and you're with me always. And I was listening to that and just thinking how easy it is for us to take for granted what we have as Christians. Somebody who's just for the first time turning to God or turning back to God, a lot of times they can have this kind of fire lit for God. And then there's, some of us who have been raised in the church, or maybe we never wandered far. And I think we can really take for granted God's peace. And so I was just thinking about that this morning, where he says, what I have is yours, and you're with me always. And I can really, I really was taking that in, and I was relating to that, because I could definitely relate to the son who maybe has kind of lost that fire a little bit and feeling like, well, nothing like that happens for me. And in truth, he has been fed and cared for and even, waited on back in this story, his whole life, and tended to and loved by his father the whole time. But you can lose sight of that, I think. And I think we can similarly take for granted the peace that we have as Christians. I know several people close to me that are dealing with really hard things, or going through a hard season, or facing, tough decisions. And these are the times when I'm thinking and praying for them, and they're in different scenarios, if you will. But when I think about them and pray for them, I'm just hoping that they are clinging to God and feeling his peace through all of this, through all the really hard things. And because, without his peace, some of the things that they're facing, I just can't even imagine. The overwhelm, just the sorrow, whatever they're, like I said, different situations, but I can't imagine handling those things without God. And so those are the times where I'm not taking it for granted. I'm really thankful for God's peace, because I don't know how else you would handle it, some of the things that life throws at us. And one of the points that I did want to make here, though, is that, it doesn't make the hard, knowing God doesn't make the hard less hard. It doesn't make the difficult things not happen to us. It doesn't even necessarily make them easier. but knowing God introduces hope and strength into our lives. It makes me think of I think it's a verse in, and I hope I don't mess this up, I want to say it's 1 Corinthians 10:13. If it's not that, it's 2 Corinthians, but I think it's first. Anyways, it's the verse that says, God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you can bear. And a lot of people stop there and say, well, I'm going through a lot. There's no way that verse is true. But that's not where it stops. It continues on and says, but he will provide a way out. And I'm, of course, paraphrasing here, but go look that verse up because I think it's really, really relevant in what I'm talking about today and what I was kind of reflecting on in church with the reading. It's not that as Christians we won't have difficult stuff happen to us. And it's not even that we will get the gift of understanding. We don't. A lot of times, we don't get the gift of understanding, and that can be really hard. We don't always get the gift of knowing why that happened to us, or seeing later on down the road, oh, thank goodness. I mean, sometimes we do, but a lot of times we don't. But that's not the point of it. It's not that knowing God makes our life easier, and in fact, in a lot of ways, God says it'll be more difficult knowing Him and being persecuted on His behalf, basically. But it's the hope that we have in God, the peace that He gives us freely when we ask for it, and the hope of eternity and the forgiveness of our sins, and just knowing that these worldly things, that's not it. This isn't where it ends. Setting our mind on the things above. And again, that doesn't mean that bad things won't happen to us. It doesn't mean even that that knowing God will make it easier, but we have hope in Him. And that can just be hard to digest, but that is my prayer for people going through things, whether they know God or not. Obviously the people that know God, I hope they're clinging to Him in their hard that they're facing. And the ones that don't, I just pray that they find Him quickly, that they turn back like the prodigal son and come home, because He will be rejoicing. Another thing that I had there, and this was actually our priest, Father Edwin, he had two notes. His homily was kind of two-pronged. And one was just saying, we should be rejoicing. We focus on the negative of this story. Why we sit here and ponder, why was the son that stayed home, why wasn't he treated like that? Or we try to dig into those things. And he said, the moral of this story is that the father rejoiced. That's what we are supposed to get out of that. And that's what we can lose sight of. And I think that that's part of, like I said earlier, we can so easily take for granted God's peace. And we're also, our human side of us, I feel like, wants to see things through a negative lens a lot of times. And so that was part of Father Edwin's message today, was that we should focus on the rejoicing. In terms of Lent, Lent is also a season for rejoicing. That's what he was kind of preaching today. We think of it as when we're fasting from something, we're going without. So, that has to be a negative thing, that we're supposed to be just woe is me during Lent. And that's not it at all. We often think of fasting or adding in extra prayer as so solemn a practice. And it can be, but the point is that it bears fruit, and that's worth rejoicing over. So we're preparing our hearts to experience Easter. That's something to rejoice about. The greatest gift that God gave us in Jesus. A lot of times I remember when this occurred to me, this was several years ago, but just thinking, everybody loves Christmas so much, for good reasons, obviously, even religiously, like Jesus is the reason for the season. So of course it's worth celebrating as well. But if the cross had not happened, what good would Jesus' birth have been to us now, thousands of years later? And yet it did happen. And so we rejoice in that not only did he die on the cross for us, but mainly that he rose from the dead and ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. So that's reason enough to rejoice. So rather than getting kind of down and out about your not having access to Dr. Pepper or sweets this week, rejoice. Let's focus on that. Rejoice in being the son that stayed home in the prodigal son parable. Rejoice in being the son who stayed home. Or if you're returning, rejoice because the Father is rejoicing. So I hope that is a little encouragement for your week. It's short and sweet today. That's my Lenten reflection. Passages you can go read from this and maybe get your own perspective, get a little more, listen to what God is telling you specifically. Let's see, 1 Corinthians, I think. 1 Corinthians 10:13, I think that's right. It's somewhere around there. If it's not, that's 2 Corinthians. And then the gospel reading today was the Prodigal Son. And like I said, every time I read that, I get something a little bit different out of it. So those are great ones to go and read throughout this week and provide some good truth and encouragement for your week. So happy Sunday and have a great 4th week of Lent.